Hi everybody, it's Tompkins from the Poynter Institute. It seems like every 4 years or so we have this conversation. What exactly is the Electoral College system and why do we have it anyway? Well, it's time for you to explain this to your viewers and listeners and readers because my suspicion is most Americans have no idea how the system works or why we even have it. You've already navigated your way through most of the complexities of the election system. We started with the primaries and caucuses, which were confusing enough because each state, it seems, has their own rules. And then, of course, we have the national conventions. The national conventions are complicated because each party has its own rules. So we find ourselves now at the general election, and most people probably think that they're actually voting for a candidate. But they're not. They're voting for electors. It's part of the Electoral College system, and 538 electoral votes are up for grabs. What exactly is the Electoral College and an electoral vote? And what's an elector? Well, let's start with the raw numbers. You know by now that each state and Washington, D.C. have an allotted number of electors. And these electors are chosen in number by the number of congressional districts plus senators that each state is allotted. So California, for example, has 55, and Florida 29, Pennsylvania 20, Illinois 20, and so on. The more populous states obviously have more electors, but the candidates don't always go to the states with the most electors because some of those states are already fairly well locked up and the outcome is all but already counted because they always seem to go one way or another predictably. So the candidates have to put together a whole slate of states that will add up to a majority of all the electors. They need a majority in order to be able to be elected president. 48 states are winner-take-all states. 48 states. Obama got about 61% of the electoral vote, but he only got 51% of the popular vote. Well, how can that be? What if, for example, and I'm going to show you some numbers, they're totally made-up numbers. I'm not trying to predict the election, I'm just trying to make a point. But let's say that you have Clinton and Trump just as an example, and let's say, again, just as a hypothetical example, Clinton would win Florida by, say, 26,000 votes, while Trump wins Michigan by, say, 1,200 votes. Then Clinton wins New York by, say, 100,000 votes, and Trump wins Texas by, say, 2,000 votes, a narrow margin. Let's also give Trump Alaska by 5,000 votes. So in this hypothetical situation, Clinton would have, to the upside, 126,000 votes out of those two states, and Trump, out of 3 states, would be up by, say, 8,200 votes. The margin of victory, overall, just from these 5 states, Clinton would be way ahead, as you can see. But when you look at the electoral votes, it would be a virtual tie, right? Trump would only be ahead by 1 electoral vote. But his margin of victory for those 3 states over her 2 states would be much less. Well, why is this a good thing? Remember, it's not likely, but there could be an electoral tie. How could that happen? It could happen if each candidate got 269 electoral votes. Now again, what I'm going to say is totally hypothetical. I'm not trying to make a prediction. I'm just trying to give you a for instance. But for instance, if Clinton were to win, say, Minnesota and Colorado, but lose Florida, it could show that she has some power in the Great Lakes states and a little bit out west, but she would lose, for example, all of those southern states. She would have to pick up some big votes in places like Pennsylvania and New York and West Virginia. She would have to pick up big votes in big electoral states. On the other hand, what if, for example, Clinton were to win Florida, but lose, say, Minnesota and Wisconsin, just as an example? And let's say that Trump picked up Colorado, just as an example. Once again, you could end up with a 269 to 269 tie. It's unlikely that you'll have a tie, but it could happen. So if it did, then what? That's when the Electoral College comes into play. Now, the Electoral College is made up of electors, and these electors are chosen by the parties in the state. Mostly, the electors are well-known, loyal party members. The U.S. Constitution, by the way, does not require them to vote for the person who won the state electoral vote. So while the whole electoral system is based in the U.S. Constitution, the Constitution doesn't require the electors to follow the will of the voters. However, 26 states say they must vote for the winner of the electoral vote. Here's a list of all the states that require the electors in some way or another to follow the will of the voters. I'm going to leave this up for just a couple of seconds for you to find your state on the list. And you can see that some of them actually require them to follow the will of the voter, or they'll be replaced and subject to a fine. In New Mexico, violation is a 4th-degree felony. So some of the states are a little more emphatic than others, but some of the states are just pretty straight up, you got to do it. In Oklahoma, it carries a fine of $1,000 if you vote in a way that you weren't supposed to vote based on the popular vote. So, why do we do the system this way? Why do we do the system as a winner-take-all system in 48 of the states? Well, for starters, the Constitution requires us to have an electoral system. This is the part of the Constitution that requires us. It's Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He, remember it says he, he shall hold his office during the terms of 4 years, and together with the Vice President chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. So no federal employee, no elected federal official may be an elector. But each state will be allotted the electors that equals the number of House members and U.S. senators. The Constitution doesn't mention that word college, which in this case is not a school, as some of your viewers, readers, and listeners probably think, but instead it's a collection of people working toward a common cause. The common cause in this case is to elect a new president and vice president. Electors tend to be party loyalists, former governors, for example. They cannot be federal employees or federally elected officials. The 12th Amendment also comes into play here. It says electors in each state will meet and vote for the President of the United States and Vice President. Now, right now, that's scheduled for December 19th, 2016. If, however, the state of the election had not been decided, say it was still up for litigation, as it was in the year 2000, then that can't happen on December 19th. But that's when it's currently scheduled. Then, after each state meets and decides the electoral vote in each state, they'll send the results to the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate actually meets in conjunction with the House. It's scheduled for January 6th, 2017. So that's actually when the real certification happens and the real election of the president actually is official, is January 6th. The person with the majority on January 6, 2017, wins. If there is no majority, if we have a tied electoral vote, then it gets really interesting. It goes to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives will decide who the president is. Each state delegation in the House has one vote. Now think about that just for a second. Every state has one vote. There won't be a tie because Washington, D.C. gets a full representation in the Electoral College vote. Even though it's a city, it's not a state. In this case, it actually has an Electoral College vote, the same as every other state. So what's wrong with this? Well, it's pretty obvious. The winner-take-all system in 48 states doesn't give equal weight to each vote. Whether you win by 1 vote or 100,000, the outcome is the same. Every election or so, it seems there's a conversation that goes nowhere to change the system to a proportional elector system like they have in Nebraska and Maine, but nothing ever seems to come of it. What else is wrong? Well, states like California are a lock for the Democrats, and they don't attract the GOP, for example, to campaign because it's a winner-take-all state. But if a candidate could gain just by getting some credit for a good popular vote showing, they might go to those states. So what else is wrong with this system? It's pretty obvious. It's this. Rhode Island, for example, would have the same power in a tie as California if the House decided an election. Remember, each state delegation in the House would have one vote. So it doesn't matter how many people they represent, they're all equal if they had to settle a tie. Is there anything good about this? Well, there might be. The electoral system does require a candidate to build a coalition from many states to get elected, so not just a few of the biggest metro states get all the attention. There's also this. The system does settle the race if there's no majority winning candidate. Nixon, for example, only had 43% of the popular vote in 1968, so the electoral system does prevent us from having to go to some sort of runoff system. Here's a big key to remember. America is not a democracy, as many politicians say. America is not a democracy that gives majority absolute power. It's a representative democracy that gives people that we elect the power to make decisions on our behalf. The electoral system just carries that notion forward. Another key to remember is this. The Electoral College system of settling an election would likely never be used without a long recount at the state levels and without lots of court battles. Just look back at the year 2000. Here's one more thing that we haven't talked about very much, but it could be important. A big key to remember is, what would happen if the Supreme Court of the United States heard the case with only 8 justices? What if the 8 justices were split down the middle, 4 and 4? I urge you to spend some time explaining this system to your readers, viewers, and listeners. Don't wait till election night and try to cram it down their throats. Try to educate them a little bit. They all need a civics lesson. I'm Tompkins from the Poynter Institute. I hope this helps.